That night, the tiny German Shepherd puppy stood nose to nose with the former Navy SEAL and let out a scream that no dog should ever be able to make. You won't believe what happened inside a smoke-filled veterans lodge when a starving stray decided to pick a fight with the most dangerous man in the room. At first, the squad thought the soldier would toss the runt out for interrupting his silence. Instead, the puppy opened his mouth to answer a direct order. What happened next shattered the tension and left a room full of hardened operators gasping for air. This is the hilarious, unforgettable story of how a 3-pound underdog broke a warrior's stone wall. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. Cigarette smoke hung in slow, heavy clouds over the LZ, swallowing the laughter of the men who gathered there to forget what they had seen. Inside the dim veterans lodge, a jukebox played a low, gritty tune that barely cut through the murmur of old war stories. It was late, past closing time for civilians, and Cole Maddox sat alone at the corner table, his massive hand wrapped around a glass of whiskey that he had no intention of finishing. He didn't mind the noise of the platoon reunion. In fact, he needed it. After a decade serving as a Tier 1 operator, total silence was the only thing that made his demons loud enough to hear. Cole was a giant of a man in his mid-30s, built like a fortress, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his tactical jacket. His dark hair was cropped close, and his face was set in a permanent, stone-cold scowl that stopped strangers in their tracks. A jagged scar ran down his forearm, tapping against the table, a physical reminder of a mission gone wrong that he couldn't scrub from his memory. His eyes, dark and intense, seemed to look right through the celebration happening around him. Most people found his presence terrifying, and that's exactly how he liked it. Intimidation was his armor. Tonight, the air in the bar felt thick with testosterone and memories. Cole set his glass down and stared at the door, his mind drifting back to the sandbox, to the team, to the losses that didn't make sense. He came to the LZ because these men didn't ask how he was doing. They knew better than to pity the stone wall. The sound of the back door creaking open broke his focus. Cole didn't turn at first, expecting another straggler from the unit. But then came a sound that didn't belong in a room full of killers, the rapid click-clack of tiny claws on hardwood. "Look at that," a soldier near the bar chuckled, pointing a beer bottle toward the entrance. A scruffy, malnourished bundle of fur trotted into the light. It was a German Shepherd puppy, no bigger than a boot, his ribs showing through a coat matted with alley dirt. He couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. The pup paused, his oversized ears twitching as if scanning for a threat. "He's lost," one of the guys muttered. "Probably looking for scraps." The puppy ignored the hands reaching out to pet him. He ignored the smell of burger grease coming from the kitchen. Instead, he locked eyes on the dark corner of the room. He fixated on Cole. Cole's jaw tightened. He didn't want company, and he certainly didn't want to nurse a stray. "Beat it," he grumbled, his voice a low rumble that usually sent rookies running. But the puppy didn't run. He marched right up to the table, hopped onto a chair, and scrambled onto the wood surface, standing directly in front of the SEAL's face. The pup shivered, not from fear, but from a strange, audacious energy. "You've got a death wish, little man?" Cole asked, leaning in. The room went quiet. The squad watched, waiting for Cole to snap. But the puppy just stared back, his tail giving a single, defiant wag. He opened his mouth and let out a sharp, demanding bark that echoed off the walls. Cole blinked. He sat up straighter, his command voice engaging instinctively. He pointed a finger at the animal. "Stand down," he roared, the order sharp enough to snap a soldier to attention. The puppy froze. His amber eyes widened. And then he did the impossible. He threw his head back and mimicked the shout perfectly, a sassy, drawn-out yowl that matched Cole's pitch and rhythm exactly, sounding for all the world like he was screaming an order right back at the giant. For a second, the world inside the bar stopped. Just the SEAL, the puppy, and the absolute absurdity of the moment. Then the room exploded. The air inside the LZ was a physical thing, a heavy cocktail of stale tobacco, spilled lager, and the kind of unfiltered laughter that only erupts from men who have cheated death one too many times. To a civilian walking in off the street, the Veterans Lodge might have looked like just another dive bar with too much memorabilia tacked to the walls, faded platoon patches, dented license plates from overseas, and photos of men who would never grow old. But to the men of Bravo Platoon, it was high ground. A sanctuary. A place where the war wasn't something you had to explain because everyone holding a glass already knew the ending. In the darkest corner of the room, anchored to a booth that groaned under his weight, sat Cole Maddox. They called him the Stone Wall, a nickname earned not just from his 6'4", 240-pound frame, but from the impenetrable fortress he had built around his own mind. Cole didn't sit, he loomed. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the neon beer signs behind him, and his face was a map of hard terrain. A square jaw set in permanent granite, eyes the color of flint, and a jagged, pale scar running down his left forearm that twitched whenever the laughter got too loud. He stared into his whiskey glass as if the amber liquid held the coordinates to a place where he could finally sleep. He wasn't drinking to get drunk. Drunk was sloppy. Drunk was dangerous. He was drinking to maintain the numbness, that precious, fragile buffer between the present moment and the memories that waited for him in the silence. Earth to Maddox, a voice cut through the haze. Cole didn't flinch. He slowly lifted his gaze, the movement deliberate and heavy, like a turret turning to acquire a target. Standing over him was Miller, the platoon's former comms specialist, a wiry man with a grin that refused to be extinguished by reality. "You're doing it again, LT," Miller said, sliding a fresh pitcher onto the scarred wood of the table. "You're doing that thing where you look like you're plotting a murder. It's a reunion, man. You're allowed to unclench your jaw for 5 minutes. It's in the regulations I checked." Cole grunted, a low, seismic sound that vibrated in his chest. "I'm fine, Miller." "You're not fine. You're a statue with a drinking problem," Miller shot back, though there was no bite in his tone, only the worry that men disguise as mockery. He gestured to the center of the room where the rest of the squad was gathered around a pool table, howling at a joke someone had just butchered. "Look at them. Johnson's showing off his shrapnel scar again. Ramirez is lying about that time in Kabul. Come on. Join the living. Join the living." The words landed like a dull thud against Cole's ribs. That was the problem, wasn't it? He had come back, but he hadn't really come back. Not all of him. He looked at his hands, the knuckles scarred and rough, resting on the sticky table. He thought about the mission 3 years ago. The one that wasn't spoken about in the loud stories. The one that ended with a folded flag and a silence so loud it drowned out everything else. Survival wasn't a prize to Cole, it was a debt. It was a heavy, suffocating coat he had to wear every single day while walking around in a world that expected him to be grateful he was still breathing. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life, observing the warmth of humanity from behind a thick pane of reinforced glass. "I'm good here," Cole said, his voice scraping like gravel. "Keep an eye on Ramirez. He's 2 shots away from dancing on the table." Miller sighed, the smile fading just enough to reveal the fatigue underneath. He knew better than to push the stone wall. "You didn't push a wall, you just leaned against it and hoped it didn't collapse." "All right, Cole. Just try not to scare the bartender, yeah? She's new." Miller drifted back to the pack and Cole retreated into his fortress. He watched them, his brothers. He loved them, fiercely and without condition, but tonight, their joy felt abrasive. It scraped against his nerves. Every laugh was a reminder of the voices that were missing from the chorus. He swirled the whiskey, watching the vortex form. He wanted to leave. He wanted to go back to his empty apartment, sit in the dark, and stare at the ceiling until exhaustion knocked him out. But leaving meant admitting that he couldn't handle a simple night out with the boys. It meant admitting the war had won. So he stayed, an anchor in the corner, holding the ground because that was the only thing he knew how to do. The jukebox clicked over to a slower track, something with a weeping steel guitar. The mood in the room dipped, just for a second, a collective breath taken by men who carried too much weight. Cole closed his eyes, letting the darkness behind his lids offer a moment of reprieve. He focused on his breathing. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The tactical breathing he'd learned to steady his aim now served only to keep him from shattering in a dive bar. He was just about to down the rest of his drink and make his exit when the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound from the soldiers. It wasn't the music. It was a draft. A cold slice of night air cut through the thick smoke as the heavy steel door at the back of the lodge, the one that opened to the alleyway and was always kept locked, creaked open with a groan of rusted hinges. Cole's eyes snapped open. His instincts, sharpened by years of hunting and being hunted, flared to life. The laughter at the pool table died down as the draft hit the other men. Heads turned. Glasses were lowered. They expected a late arrival. Maybe a delivery. Maybe just the wind playing tricks on a broken latch. But as Cole stared into the slice of darkness revealed by the open door, he realized no human was standing there. The doorway appeared empty at eye level. Then he heard it. Not the heavy boot falls of a soldier, but a sharp, rhythmic click-click-click against the linoleum floor. Something small. Something completely out of place in a room full of apex predators. Cole leaned forward, his brow furrowing as a shadow detached itself from the gloom of the alleyway and stepped boldly into the light. It wasn't an enemy. It wasn't a reinforcement. It was something that was about to turn Cole Maddox's disciplined, silent world completely upside down, and it was heading straight for him. The creature that materialized from the gloom of the alleyway was, by all tactical assessments, a disaster. It was a puppy, though that word seemed too cute for the scruffy, battered thing that stood shivering on the linoleum. He was a German Shepherd mix of some kind, but he looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts in the dark. His ears were impossibly large for his head, one standing at a jagged attention while the other flopped lazily over his left eye. His coat was a chaotic blend of mud-caked tan and black, and his ribs played a xylophone tune against his skin with every ragged breath he took. He couldn't have weighed more than 5 pounds soaking wet, yet he stood in the doorway with the posture of a lion surveying its kingdom. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind him, cut by the wind, sealing the bar back into its smoky isolation. "Well, I'll be damned," Miller said, breaking the stunned silence. "We've been infiltrated." The puppy shook himself off, sending a small cloud of alley dust into the air, and sneezed violently. The sound was high-pitched and ridiculous, instantly shattering the tension that had gripped the room moments before. A few of the guys chuckled, the hard lines of their faces softening instinctively. Soldiers were suckers for strays. It was a universal law of combat. You could be a stone-cold killer in the field, but put a starving animal in front of a platoon, and suddenly everyone turned into a grandmother. "Hey there, buddy," Ramirez cooed, crouching down near the pool table and snapping his fingers. He held out a piece of beef jerky from his pocket. "Come here. You hungry? Got some protein for you." Any normal stray would have scrambled across the floor, tail tucked, desperate for the handout. But this was not a normal stray. The puppy turned his head toward Ramirez, sniffed the air dismissively, and then turned away. He ignored the jerky. He ignored the whistles and the kissing noises coming from the other men. He trotted past the pool table with his nose in the air, his paws clicking a steady, determined rhythm against the floorboards. He wasn't looking for a snack, he was looking for a commander. From his fortified position in the corner, Cole watched the animal with a mix of irritation and bewilderment. He didn't like surprises and he didn't like things that didn't follow the rules. A stray dog should be begging for food, not conducting a perimeter inspection. "He's got standards, Ramirez," someone laughed. "Your jerky ain't good enough." The puppy continued his patrol, weaving through the legs of barstools and combat boots. He moved with a strange, wobbly confidence, his oversized paws occasionally tripping over themselves, but he never stopped. He was tracking something. Cole took a sip of his whiskey, his eyes narrowing as the animal's path began to straighten out. The dog wasn't wandering aimlessly anymore. He had locked onto a target. The puppy's amber eyes, bright and shockingly intelligent, were fixed on the darkest corner of the room. They were fixed on Cole. "Oh no," Miller whispered, watching the trajectory. "Don't do it, kid. That's a restricted area." Cole saw the moment the decision was made. The puppy stopped about 10 feet away, tilted his head to the side so his floppy ears slid further down his face, and stared directly at the hulking figure in the booth. Most men couldn't hold eye contact with Cole Maddox for more than 3 seconds before their survival instincts kicked in and forced them to look away. But this 3-pound furball held the gaze, seemingly unimpressed by the scar, the scowl, or the sheer mass of the man. "Go away," Cole grumbled, the words vibrating low in his throat. It was a warning shot. The puppy didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a short, sharp huff of air through his nose, a sound that sounded suspiciously like a scoff, and resumed his march. The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of anticipation. The squad had stopped playing pool. They were leaning on their cues, watching the impending collision between the immovable object and the unstoppable, tiny force. $10 says Cole kicks him out, Johnson whispered to Miller. 20 says Cole accidentally scares the life out of him just by breathing, Miller whispered back, though he looked ready to intervene if things got ugly. Cole watched the intruder close the distance. He felt a flicker of annoyance rising in his chest. He came here to be alone, to rot in peace, not to be pestered by a flea-bitten runaway. He shifted in his seat, his leather jacket creaking loudly, making himself look even bigger, expanding his silhouette to fill the booth. It was a tactic that worked on rookie soldiers and drunk civilians alike. "I am big, I am dangerous, and I am not to be trifled with." The puppy arrived at the base of the booth. He was so small that Cole had to lean over the edge of the table just to see him. The dog sat down. He sat squarely on Cole's heavy combat boot, claiming it as his personal cushion. He looked up, his tail giving a single tentative thump against the floor. Thump. Cole stared down at the creature. The dog was trembling, likely from hunger or the cold, but his eyes were fierce. There was a fire in them that Cole recognized. It was the look of someone who had been through hell and decided to keep walking anyway. "Get off the boot," Cole commanded, his voice flat and hard. The puppy didn't move. He just opened his mouth and let his tongue loll out to the side, panting softly. The squad was holding its breath. They knew Cole's temper. They knew his intolerance for chaos. They waited for the explosion, for the shout that would send the animal scurrying back to the alley. But Cole just sat there, frozen by the sheer audacity of the animal. The puppy wasn't asking for affection. He was demanding a parley. And then, the puppy did something that shifted the dynamic from a minor annoyance to an active situation. He stood up on his hind legs, scrabbling his muddy paws against the polished wood of the booth's bench, trying to hoist himself up to eye level. He grunted with effort, his claws slipping, but he refused to drop back down. He was determined to bridge the gap between the floor and the man. Cole watched the struggle, his brow furrowed deeper. "You are a persistent little pest, aren't you?" The dog managed to hook his front elbows over the edge of the seat. He hung there for a second, legs dangling, looking ridiculous before he scrambled up onto the leather beside Cole. He didn't curl up. He didn't cower. He marched across the seat, climbed onto the wooden table, and stood amidst the forest of empty beer bottles and whiskey glasses. He was now nose to nose with the stone wall. Cole leaned back, stunned. The squad erupted into stifled snickers, hands covering their mouths. The most feared man in Bravo platoon had just been boarded and conquered by a creature that was mostly ears and attitude. But as Cole opened his mouth to deliver a final, thunderous eviction notice, the puppy narrowed his eyes and took a deep breath, preparing to launch a counteroffensive that no one in the room saw coming. The table was a chaotic landscape of half-empty bottles, crushed napkins, and scarred oak, but Nugget navigated it with the arrogant swagger of a conquering general inspecting seized territory. He stepped over a coaster, sniffed a bowl of stale pretzels with mild disdain, and then zeroed in on the prize, Cole's glass of whiskey. The amber liquid caught the dim light of the bar, shimmering like liquid gold. To a starving puppy it probably looked like apple juice. To Cole Maddox, it was the only thing standing between him and a total psychological retreat. Cole watched the animals advance with a kind of paralyzed disbelief. In the field, he had stared down insurgents, negotiated with warlords, and breached compounds wired with enough explosives to level a city block. He knew how to handle threats. He knew the protocol for escalation of force. But the protocol manual did not cover 6-week-old fur grenade climbing on your table. "Don't even think about it," Cole warned, his voice a low rumble of shifting tectonic plates. Nugget paused. He looked at the glass. He looked at Cole. His tail gave a slow, calculating swish-swish through the air. Then, maintaining unwavering eye contact, he lifted one muddy, trembling paw and placed it deliberately against the base of the heavy glass. The audacity was breathtaking. "I'm serious," Cole growled, leaning in until his face was inches from the pup's muzzle. "You tip that and you're a rug." The room around them had gone deadly silent. The pool game had stopped completely. Miller, Ramirez, and Johnson were now openly staring, their expressions a mix of horror and delighted anticipation. They knew Cole's temper was a volatile thing, usually reserved for incompetence or enemy fire. Seeing it directed at a creature that could fit inside a cargo pocket was surreal. "He's testing the perimeter LT," Miller whispered, his voice cracking with suppressed laughter. "Hold the line." Nugget didn't care about the line. He cared about the shiny liquid. He tapped the glass again, harder this time. The whiskey sloshed dangerously close to the rim. That was it. The line had been crossed. "Hey!" Cole snapped, the word sharp enough to cut glass. Most dogs would have bolted. A normal dog would have sensed the predator in front of them. The sheer mass, the predatory stillness, the scent of violence that clung to Cole like cheap cologne, and run for the hills. But Nugget wasn't a normal dog. He was a creature of chaos born in an alleyway, and he evidently didn't speak human intimidation. Nugget retracted his paw, sat back on his haunches, puffed out his tiny chest and barked. It wasn't a scared yelp. It wasn't a playful yip. It was a sharp, indignant yap that sounded shockingly like a refusal. It was the canine equivalent of "make me." The silence in the bar deepened, becoming heavy and thick. Even the bartender stopped wiping a glass. Cole blinked, his brain struggling to process the insubordination. He had shouted at grown men who had wet themselves in fear. He had silenced crowded rooms with a single look. And this Mutt just backtalked him? Did that dog just tell the stone wall no? Ramirez whispered, looking at Miller. I think he did, Miller replied, eyes wide. I think he just signed his death warrant. Cole slowly sat up straight. The leather of the booth groaned under the shift in weight. He placed his hands flat on the table, framing the puppy. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. The annoyance had faded, replaced by the cold, tactical focus he used before breaching a door. This wasn't about a spilled drink anymore. This was about order. This was about the chain of command. And right now, the chain was being yanked by a 3-pound furball with floppy ears. He took a deep breath, expanding his massive chest. He decided it was time to end this charade. He wouldn't hurt the thing, he wasn't a monster, but he would put the fear of God into it. He would use the voice. Every NCO had a command voice, but Cole's was legendary. It was a weaponized sonic boom that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the skeletal structure. It triggered the primal flight response in mammals. It made rookies cry and enemies surrender. He locked eyes with the defiant puppy. The squad braced themselves. Miller actually covered his ears. Cole opened his mouth, his lungs filling with air, ready to unleash a thunderous command that would send the puppy scrambling off the table and into submission, restoring the natural order of the universe. He was the apex predator. He was the stone wall. And he was about to win this standoff. But as Cole drew that breath, winding up for the shout that would rattle the windows, Nugget's ears perked up. The puppy's eyes narrowed, reading the body language, sensing the incoming barrage. And instead of cowering, the little dog took a deep breath of his own, coiled his tiny muscles, and prepared to do something that would turn Cole's world completely upside down. The air in the booth seemed to vanish, sucked into Cole's lungs as he prepared to unleash the kind of sonic weaponry usually reserved for insubordinate privates or door-kicking raids. He didn't just want the dog off the table. He wanted to re-establish the laws of physics in a world that felt increasingly spineless. The puppy stood his ground, ears pricked, amber eyes wide and challenging, vibrating with an energy that was either pure courage or a total lack of self-preservation. Cole let it fly. Stand down. The command didn't just leave his mouth, it detonated. It was a baritone thunderclap that rattled the empty beer bottles against one another and vibrated in the chest cavity of every man within a 30-foot radius. It was the voice of authority, stripped of all patience, designed to override the nervous system of any living creature and force immediate, unquestioning compliance. In the stunned silence that followed the shockwave, the dust motes in the air seemed to hang motionless. The squad cringed, bracing for the inevitable whimper of a terrified animal scrambling for cover under the nearest chair. Miller actually closed his eyes, already feeling guilty for the psychological damage just inflicted on a 6-week-old stray. But there was no whimper. There was no scrambling. Nugget didn't even blink. Instead, the puppy seemed to absorb the acoustic blast, processing the volume and the pitch like a tiny fur-covered sound engineer. He stiffened his front legs, puffed out his malnourished chest until he looked like a fuzzy, jagged rock, and threw his head back with the dramatic flair of an opera singer. And then he fired back. R-R-R-O-R-O. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a howl. It was a perfect, ear-splitting mimicry of Cole's command. Nugget matched the seal's volume, the aggressive cadence, and even the sharp, downward inflection at the end of the shout. It was a guttural, sassy scream that sounded uncannily like he was yelling, "SID down," right back into the man's face. The sound hung in the air for a split second, a defiant echo of the soldier's roar. Cole sat frozen, his mouth still slightly open, his brain misfiring. He had expected fear. He had expected flight. He had not expected a roast. The puppy snapped his mouth shut, lowered his head, and gave a single emphatic huff, the canine equivalent of a mic drop, before staring Cole dead in the eye with a look that clearly said, "Is that all you got?" The silence in the bar shattered. It started with Miller. A high-pitched wheeze escaped his nose, followed by a snort that he tried desperately to suppress. Then Johnson cracked, doubling over and slapping his hand against his thigh. Within seconds, the entire table erupted. It wasn't polite laughter. It was the raucous, tear-inducing, table-slapping hysteria of men who hadn't laughed, truly laughed, in years. Ramirez was clutching the edge of the pool table to hold himself up, gasping for air. Even the bartender was shaking her head, a towel pressed to her mouth to hide her grin. He told you?" Miller gasped, wiping tears from his eyes. "He just told you to stand down." "The stone wall. I think you just got outranked, Cole." Johnson howled, pointing a shaking finger at the puppy, who was now wagging his tail, clearly pleased with the reaction he'd elicited. Cole remained motionless, staring at the tiny creature standing amidst the wreckage of his dignity. He felt the familiar heat of anger flare up, the reflex to shut down the mockery to reassert control. But as he looked at the puppy, this scruffy, starving, audacious scrap of life that had walked into a den of lions and roared back, the anger hit a wall and dissipated. The absurdity of it was absolute. Here he was, a man trained to kill with his bare hands, a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, being verbally undressed by an animal that couldn't even chew solid food yet. The corner of Cole's mouth twitched. He tried to fight it. He clamped his jaw shut, trying to summon the scowl that had kept the world at bay for 3 years. But the puppy gave a little hop, his front paws tapping the table in a victory dance, and let out a soft, playful yip. The dam broke. The scowl cracked, splintering under the weight of the moment. A smile, rusty, unfamiliar, and reluctant, tugged at Cole's lips. Then a low chuckle rumbled in his chest, a sound so foreign it almost hurt. "You little bastard," Cole muttered, shaking his head. The laughter from the squad redoubled at the sight of Cole Maddox actually smiling. "I got it," Ramirez yelled, waving his phone in the air like a trophy. "Tell me you saw the red light." "I got the whole thing. The roar and the roast." "Delete that, Ramirez," Cole warned, though there was no real heat in his voice. He reached out a massive hand toward the puppy. The squad went silent again, watching. But instead of shoving the dog away, Cole extended a single finger. Nugget sniffed it, gave it a rough, sandpaper lick, and then boldly pressed his forehead against Cole's knuckles, leaning his entire tiny weight against the man's hand. The contact sent a jolt through Cole that had nothing to do with adrenaline. It was warm. It was alive. It was a connection he hadn't realized he was starving for until that very second. "You think you're tough, huh?" Cole whispered, using his thumb to gently scuff the fur behind the puppy's oversized ears. Nugget closed his eyes and let out a long, contented sigh, looking for all the world like he had just conquered a mountain and was now settling in to enjoy the view. "Well," Miller said, wiping his eyes and leaning against the booth, "I guess we know who runs the platoon now." Cole didn't answer. He just kept scratching the dog's ears, the ghost of a smile still lingering on his face. For the first time all night, the heavy blanket of memories felt a little lighter. The silence in his head wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the ridiculous, defiant echo of a puppy's scream. But as the adrenaline of the moment faded and the bartender flicked the overhead lights to signal closing time, reality began to creep back in. The laughter died down into the comfortable shuffle of men gathering their coats and tabs. "All right, show's over," the bartender called out. "You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And take the circus act with you." Cole pulled his hand back. The moment was over. He was a man living in a studio apartment with a lease that strictly forbade pets, a schedule that didn't allow for dependents, and a heart that was closed for business. He couldn't keep a dog. Especially not a chaotic, loud-mouthed stray that mimicked military commands. He stood up, the leather of the booth creaking. Nugget opened his eyes, sensing the movement. "All right," Cole said, his voice returning to its usual gruff register. "Fun's over. Scram, kid." He stepped out of the booth and turned toward the door, buttoning his jacket. He expected the dog to stay on the table, scavenging for pretzel crumbs. He expected to walk out into the cold night alone, just like he always did. He took 2 steps toward the exit. Click, click, click. Cole stopped. He looked down. Nugget was at his heel, sitting at a perfect position of attention, looking up at him with an expression of absolute expectation. "No," Cole said firmly. "I'm not your dad. Go bother Miller." He took another step. Click, click. The puppy moved in perfect unison, glued to his combat boot like he was magnetized. Cole looked up to see the rest of the squad standing by the door, watching the scene unfold with crossed arms and knowing smirks. They weren't going to help him. In fact, they looked like they were guarding the exit, blocking any escape route that didn't involve the puppy. Cole looked back down at the dog. Nugget let out a soft whine, tilting his head. It wasn't a demand this time. It was a question. "Where are we going?" Cole sighed, looking from the dog to the door and back again, realizing with a sinking feeling that the roast was just the opening skirmish. The real battle was about to begin, and he was dangerously outflanked. The transition from the smoky warmth of the LZ to the biting reality of the Utah night was brutal. The heavy steel door swung shut with a finality that echoed like a cell door closing, leaving the men of Bravo platoon standing in the alleyway, exhaling plumes of white vapor into the freezing air. The wind had picked up, cutting through flannel shirts and denim jackets with icy indifference. "All right, boys," Miller said, zipping his collar up to his chin. "Uber's 5 minutes out." Don't let Ramirez fall in a puddle. Cole Maddox stood slightly apart from the group, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tactical jacket. He needed the cold. He needed the shock of it to scrub the unexpected warmth of the last hour from his system. He needed to reset his baseline back to zero, back to solitary, back to silent, back to safe. He gave a curt nod to the group. I'm walking. Clear your heads. Don't do anything stupid. Aye aye, Dad, Ramirez slurred, leaning heavily against a dumpster. Cole turned his collar up against the wind and started walking toward the streetlights at the end of the alley. His boots crunched on the gravel. He focused on the rhythm. Left, right, left, right. It was the cadence of leaving. He was good at leaving. He'd left war zones, he'd left relationships, he'd left the person he used to be before the service. Walking away was his primary MOS now. Click, 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 click. Cole stopped. He didn't turn around. He squeezed his eyes shut and let out a long, pained sigh that was instantly snatched away by the wind. Go back, he said to the empty air in front of him. What? It was a pathetic, high-pitched sound, vibrating with a level of misery that felt scientifically engineered to target the human guilt center. Cole turned around slowly. 10 feet behind him, shivering so violently he looked like a vibrating blur, sat the puppy. Nugget was pressed against the brick wall of the lodge, trying to find shelter from the wind, but his eyes were locked on Cole. He wasn't begging for food anymore. He was shivering, lifting one paw off the freezing ground and then the other, doing a desperate little dance to keep his circulation going. You can't follow me, Cole said, his voice stern. I live 6 blocks away. It's freezing. Go find a grate or something. The puppy just stared at him. Then he let out a short, chattering bark and took a wobbly step forward. He chose ULT, Miller's voice called out from the group huddled near the door. Cole glared over the puppy's head at his former squad. They hadn't moved. They were standing in a semicircle, arms crossed, watching the standoff with judgment written all over their faces. He's a stray, Cole called back. He belongs to the streets. Look at him, Cole, Johnson said, stepping forward. He's shaking. He's got no fur, no fat, and he just burned all his calories roasting you in there. You leave him here, he's a popsicle by morning. Not my problem, Cole lied. He felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, heavy and suffocating. He hated it. Take him to a shelter. Shelters closed until 0900, Miller countered, checking his watch. And you know the kill rate for strays in this county. You leave him, you're basically executing him. That is a gross exaggeration and you know it, Cole snapped. Is it? Ramirez chimed in, suddenly sounding sober. He's a runt, Cole. He's compromised. He's got no unit support. You really gonna leave a man behind? Cole's jaw tightened. He's a dog, Ramirez. Not a man. He stood his ground against the stone wall, Miller said quietly. That earns him a spot in the extract vehicle. Protocol is protocol. Cole looked back down at the puppy. Nugget had stopped moving toward him and had curled into a tight, trembling ball on the dirty asphalt. He looked impossibly small. A scrap of life that the universe had decided to discard. Cole felt a crack in his chest. It was the same feeling he got when he saw a rookie freeze up in a firefight. It wasn't pity, it was a recognition of vulnerability. The world was a meat grinder and this little thing was trying to jam the gears with nothing but attitude. Damn it, Cole hissed. He marched back toward the puppy. The squad stayed silent, knowing better than to cheer. They just watched as the giant knelt on the gravel. Cole loomed over the dog. You are a tactical nightmare, he muttered. You have no survival instincts. You are loud. You are dirty. Nugget lifted his head, his ears flattening against his skull. He let out a soft, rattling breath. And I am going to regret this, Cole finished. He unzipped his heavy tactical jacket halfway. The sound of the zipper was loud in the alley. He reached down, his massive hands scooping the puppy up in one motion. The dog was shockingly light. He felt fragile, like a collection of bird bones wrapped in coarse fur. But the moment Cole lifted him, the puppy didn't struggle. He didn't bite. He immediately collapsed into the warmth of Cole's palms, letting out a groan of pure relief. Cole shoved the puppy inside his jacket, pressing him against the wool of his sweater, and zipped the coat back up until only the dog's head was sticking out just below his chin. The transformation was instant. The shivering stopped. The puppy wiggled, adjusting his position until his cold nose was buried in the crook of Cole's neck, seeking the pulse point, the deepest source of heat. Cole stiffened. The sensation was alien, a living, breathing heartbeat pressed directly against his own. It was intimate in a way he hadn't experienced in years. It was a violation of his perimeter, but the heat radiating from the little body was undeniably grounding against the biting wind. "Just for tonight," Cole announced to the squad, pointing a finger at Miller. "I drop him at the pound when they open. I'm not keeping a dog." "Copy that, LT," Miller said, grinning wide enough to crack his face. "Just a temporary extract. We read you loud and clear." "Temporary," Cole reiterated, more to himself than anyone else. "Whatever you say, boss," Johnson laughed. "Make sure you debrief him on house rules." Cole turned on his heel, shielding the bulge in his jacket from the wind with his forearm, and stalked out of the alley. The walk home was a blur of conflicting sensations. The city was asleep, the streets empty and gray. Usually this was the time Cole's mind started to eat itself, replaying the tapes of the past. But tonight he couldn't focus on the ghosts. He could only focus on the furnace strapped to his chest. Nugget had fallen asleep almost instantly. He was a dead weight in the jacket, his breathing syncing up with Cole's stride. Every now and then the puppy would twitch, his whiskers tickling Cole's throat, or he would let out a small, murmuring snore that vibrated through Cole's ribs. It was annoying. It was inconvenient. And it was the first time in 3 years that Cole Maddox wasn't walking home alone. He kept one hand over the lump in his jacket, telling himself it was just to keep the dog from falling out. But his fingers were curled protectively, shielding the animal from the wind, holding him steady. When he finally reached his apartment building, a monolithic brick structure that smelled of floor wax and indifference, he paused at the entrance. The sign on the glass door was faded but legible, and no soliciting, no smoking, strictly no pets. Cole looked at the sign. He looked down at the tuft of fur sticking out of his collar. "You're not a pet," Cole whispered to the sleeping dog. "You're contraband." He punched his code into the keypad and slipped inside, moving quickly past the dozing security guard. He took the stairs instead of the elevator to avoid the cameras, climbing the 4 flights with the ease of a man used to rucking 80 pounds of gear. He reached his door, fumbled for his keys, and stepped into the sterile silence of his apartment. It was a bachelor pad in the bleakest sense of the word. A leather couch, a TV, a kitchenette with nothing on the counters and blackout curtains that were always drawn. It was clean, orderly, and completely devoid of life. Cole locked the door, flipped on the dim hall light, and unzipped his jacket. "All right, stowaway. End of the line." He reached in to pull the dog out. Nugget groaned, clinging to the wool sweater with tiny claws, refusing to be evicted from his warm cave. Cole had to peel him off like Velcro. He set the puppy down on the hardwood floor. Nugget wobbled for a second, blinked his sleep-crusted eyes and looked around. He sniffed the floor. He sniffed the couch. Then he looked up at Cole, shook his body from nose to tail, and immediately squatted. Cole's eyes widened. "Don't you dare." A spreading puddle of yellow darkened the pristine hardwood floor. Nugget finished, stepped daintily out of the puddle, and looked at Cole with a wag of his tail. He let out a sharp, expectant bark that echoed in the empty apartment. Cole stared at the puddle. He stared at the dog. He realized 2 things simultaneously. First, that the silence he had so carefully cultivated for 3 years was officially dead. And second, that he had absolutely no idea how to keep this creature alive until morning. As Nugget trotted toward the kitchen, claws clicking on the floor, hunting for something to destroy, Cole rubbed his temples and exhaled a long, defeated breath. "What have I done?" he muttered. But from the kitchen, there was a crash of a trash can being tipped over, followed by the triumphant sound of rummaging. The intruder hadn't just breached the perimeter, he was already raiding the supply cache. And Cole, the stone wall, realized with a sinking feeling that he didn't have a contingency plan for this. The battle for the apartment began at 0200 hours. Cole stared at the overturned kitchen trash can, the contents, mostly empty takeout containers and coffee grounds, scattered across the linoleum like the debris of a failed airstrike. In the center of the carnage sat Nugget, waging war against a crumpled foil wrapper with the ferocity of a wolf taking down an elk. "Cease fire," Cole ordered, rubbing his eyes. Nugget ignored him, shaking the foil wrapper so violently his ears slapped against his own face. Cole sighed, grabbed a roll of paper towels and crouched down. "Listen up, recruit. If you are going to survive in this forward operating base, there are going to be rules of engagement. Rule number 1, we do not eat garbage. Rule number 2, we do not urinate on the hardwood. Rule number 3, you follow orders." Nugget dropped the wrapper, looked Cole dead in the eye, and let out a long, defiant burp. "Insubordination," Cole muttered, snatching the wrapper away before the dog could reclaim it. "I'll have you court-martialed before sunrise." For the next 4 hours, Cole Maddox attempted to apply the rigorous, time-tested discipline of the United States Navy SEALs to a creature that possessed the attention span of a gnat and the bladder control of a leaky faucet. It was, without a doubt, the most humiliating mission of his career. He tried to establish a perimeter. He used throw pillows from the couch, objects he had never actually touched before tonight, to build a barricade in the corner of the living room. "This is your bunk," Cole explained, pointing to the makeshift pen lined with an old tactical towel. "You stay in the bunk. You maintain your gear. You sleep." He placed Nugget inside the fortress. Nugget looked at the pillows, looked at Cole, and then simply walked through the barricade, tripping over a cushion and tumbling out the other side with a happy yip. The concept of walls seemed to be purely theoretical to him. "Perimeter breached," Cole groaned. He tried to establish a patrol schedule. Every 20 minutes, like clockwork, Cole marched the puppy to the front door, carried him down the 4 flights of stairs to the small patch of grass outside the building, and issued the command, "Release." Nugget would sniff the grass, chase a moth, chew on a dandelion, and stare blankly at Cole. But he would not go to the bathroom. "Target is the grass," Cole whispered intensely, looking around to make sure no neighbors were watching the terrifying stone wall whisper to a puppy at 3 a.m. "Engage the target." Nugget would wag his tail and do nothing. Then, the moment they walked back upstairs and entered the apartment, Nugget would sprint to the expensive rug in the hallway and relieve himself with a look of pure relief. By 04:30, Cole was sitting on the floor of his living room, back pressed against the couch, exhausted in a way that combat never made him feel. Combat was adrenaline. This was a war of attrition. Nugget, apparently recharged by his acts of domestic terrorism, was currently engaged in a high-speed engagement with Cole's left sock. He growled and shook his head, his tiny teeth snagging the wool. "That's a government-issued sock," Cole said tiredly, not bothering to stop him. "You're destroying federal property." Nugget paused, the sock hanging from his mouth, and let out a muffled woof. Cole looked at the dog. For the last 3 years, the only voice in this apartment had been the drone of the television or the silence of his own head. He hadn't spoken out loud in this room since he signed the lease. But now, in the weird, blue-gray light of pre-dawn, the silence felt too heavy to carry alone. "You know," Cole said, his voice raspy, "you remind me of a guy I knew. Texas." He was loud, didn't listen to orders, and ate garbage too. Nugget dropped the sock and tilted his head, his amber eyes locking onto Cole's face. He seemed to sense the shift in tone. He didn't bark. He just listened. Cole looked down at his hands. He didn't make it back. None of them did. The words hung in the air, raw and exposed. Cole waited for the familiar wave of shame, the instinct to shut down and retreat into the stone fortress. But the wave didn't come. Instead, Nugget crawled across the floor, his belly dragging on the wood, and shimmied until he was pressed against Cole's thigh. He rested his chin on Cole's knee and let out a long, heavy sigh. "You don't care about any of that, do you?" Cole whispered. "You just want the sock." Nugget thumped his tail once. Thump. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Cole reached out and ran his hand down the puppy's back. The fur was still rough with dirt, but the warmth underneath was steady. It was a grounding wire. For the first time in a long time, Cole felt the static in his brain quiet down. He wasn't thinking about the mission. He was thinking about how he was going to explain the peace stain to the landlord. "You can't stay here," Cole told the dog, though the conviction in his voice had evaporated. I'm not good for things that need keeping. I break things. Or I lose them." Nugget lifted his head and licked Cole's hand. It was a rough, wet, sandpaper kiss that offered no judgment, only presence. "Don't try to charm me," Cole grumbled, though he didn't pull his hand away. "It won't work. Operation Rehoming commences at 0900. Nugget yawned, a wide, pink-mouthed yawn that ended with a squeak, and then curled up tightly against Cole's leg. Within seconds, the chaotic energy vanished, replaced by the rhythmic breathing of deep sleep. Cole leaned his head back against the couch cushions. He watched the sun begin to creep through the cracks in the blackout curtains, painting thin lines of light across the floor. He should get up. He should pack the dog's things, which consisted entirely of the stolen sock, and get ready for the shelter. But he didn't move. He didn't want to wake the recruit. Cole closed his eyes, drifting into a light doze, the first peaceful sleep he'd had in months. No nightmares. Just the weight of the dog against his leg and the faint sound of puppy snores. He was woken hours later by a vibration. It wasn't an explosion. It was his phone, buzzing violently on the coffee table. Cole jolted awake, his heart hammering for a split second before he remembered where he was. The apartment was bright. It was morning. and Nugget was gone. Panic spiked in his chest. Nugget. A head popped up from inside one of Cole's tactical boots near the door. The puppy had apparently decided that if he couldn't eat the boot, he would live in it. Cole exhaled, rubbing his face. At ease. The phone buzzed again. And again. And again. It was vibrating so hard it was walking across the table. Cole frowned. He never got calls. Miller texted occasionally to make sure he wasn't dead, but this was a barrage. He reached out and grabbed the device, squinting at the screen. 17 missed texts. 4 missed calls. And a stream of notifications from social media apps he hadn't opened in years. He unlocked the phone and opened the group chat with the squad. It was a wall of capital letters. Miller, dude. Ramirez, tell me you saw it. Johnson, you're famous, bro. Miller, check the link. It's everywhere. There was a link to a video hosting site. Cole's stomach churned. A cold feeling washed over him, completely erasing the warmth of the morning. He tapped the link. A video player loaded. It was shaky, vertical footage taken inside a dimly lit bar. The title was in bold, screaming letters. Tiny puppy roasts huge Navy SEAL. Hilarious. Cole pressed play. On the tiny screen he saw himself, looking massive and terrifying in his leather jacket, yelling, "Stand down." And then clear as day came the sassy, high-pitched mimicry of the puppy. The camera shook as the person filming exploded with laughter. The view count was climbing. 10,000. 50,000. 100,000. Cole stared at the screen. He read the comments below the video. That guy is terrifying, but the dog owns him. Who is that soldier? He looks like a movie villain. I need to know if he kept the dog. Does anyone know where this bar is? I think I recognize the patch on the wall. Cole lowered the phone. His heart was racing, the old, familiar paranoia creeping back in. He had spent 3 years trying to be invisible. He had spent 3 years erasing his footprint, becoming a ghost in a city of millions. And now, thanks to a 3-pound dog and a cell phone camera, the stone wall had just been breached by the entire internet. Nugget, sensing the tension, wiggled out of the boot and trotted over, letting out a happy bark. Cole looked at the dog, then back at the phone, which buzzed again with a notification from a local news outlet. We have a problem, Cole whispered. But he didn't know the half of it. The video hadn't just gone viral. It had been seen by someone from his past. Someone who had been looking for Cole Maddox for a very long time, and now finally knew exactly where to find him. The vibration in Cole's hand felt like a live grenade counting down. He stared at the screen, watching the view count on the video tick upward with terrifying speed. 250,000. 300,000. It was a digital infection, spreading exponentially through the networks of the internet, carrying with it the one thing Cole Maddox had spent 3 years meticulously destroying. His visibility. This can't be happening, he muttered, his thumb hovering over the screen. The video loop was relentless. There he was, the stone wall, hulking and imposing in the dim light of the LZ, bellowing a command that would have made a rookie wet himself. And there was Nugget, the fuzzy insurgent, throwing his head back and screaming defiance right into the camera lens. It was funny. Cole could objectively see that. It was objectively hilarious. But to Cole it looked like a security breach. His phone buzzed again, lighting up with a call from Miller. Cole swiped to answer, pressing the phone to his ear with aggressive force. You have 5 seconds to tell me you didn't upload this, Cole growled, skipping the greeting. Whoa, easy Hollywood, Miller's voice crackled, sounding entirely too cheerful. I didn't post it. Ramirez sent it to his cousin, who sent it to a group chat, who put it on TikTok. It's out of containment, LT. You're trending. Do you know how hard it is to trend? You're bigger than the dancing cat video right now. I don't want to be trending, Cole snapped, pacing the length of his small living room. Nugget trotted behind him, nipping at his heels, thinking this was a new game called Angry Pacing Man. I want it taken down. Scrub it. You can't scrub the internet, Cole. That's like trying to mop up the ocean, Miller laughed. Besides, look at the engagement. People love it. They love you. They don't know me, Cole shot back. They see a caricature. They see a joke. Read the comments, Cole. I'm not reading the comments. The comments are where humanity goes to die. Just read them, Miller insisted, his voice softening slightly. Trust me. Just take a look. And hey, nice job not killing the dog last night. Miller hung up before Cole could fire back a retort. Cole lowered the phone. He felt exposed, stripped of the anonymity that had been his armor. For 3 years he had been a ghost in Cedar Ridge. He went to the gym at 4 a.m. He bought groceries at the self-checkout. He sat in the darkest corner of the bar. He did everything possible to ensure that when people looked at him, they saw nothing but a scary, silent wall. Now, millions of strangers were staring at him on their morning commute. He looked down at Nugget. The puppy had found the stolen sock again and was currently shaking it violently, growling with a ferocity that was entirely disproportionate to the threat level of the wool blend. "You did this," Cole accused him. "You're a sabotage agent." Nugget paused, one ear flopped over his eye and wagged his tail. Thump thump. Cole sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. He sat down heavily on the couch, the leather creaking. He knew he shouldn't do it. He knew it was a tactical error. But the curiosity, the morbid need to assess the damage, won out. He opened the video app again. He expected mockery. He expected people making fun of the intense, scary guy getting owned by a rat dog. He expected the internet to be cruel because the internet was usually a reflection of the world, and the world was rarely kind. He started scrolling. User_778. "Okay, I came for the puppy scream, but can we talk about the guy? He looks like he eats tanks for breakfast, but the way he cracks up at the end? Wholesome." Sarah J_99. "That laugh. You can tell he hasn't laughed like that in a long time. His whole face changes. We need more of this energy." Cole frowned. He scrolled further. Vetbrunderschichel. "I know that look. That's the 1,000-yard stare, getting broken. That dog just did what 10 years of therapy probably couldn't. Good for you, brother." Cole froze. His thumb hovered over the screen. He read the comment again. "That dog just did what 10 years of therapy probably couldn't." He kept reading. The stone wall crumbled. Look at his eyes at the 014 mark. The moment the dog sasses him, the darkness just leaves his face. It's beautiful. I hope he kept the dog. They need each other. You can see it. My husband came back from overseas just like this guy. Quiet. Angry. We got a lab mix and it was the first time I saw him smile in 2 years. This video made me cry. Cole lowered the phone to his lap. The anger that had been simmering in his chest began to cool, replaced by a strange, hollow ache. He had been so convinced that the video exposed his weakness, his loss of control. He thought people were laughing at him. But they weren't. They were rooting for him. They saw something in the pixelated footage that Cole had refused to see in the mirror. They saw a man who was drowning, and they saw the exact moment a lifeline was thrown to him in the shape of a sassy, malnourished puppy. He looked across the room. Nugget had abandoned the sock and was now sprawled on the floor in a patch of sunlight, sleeping on his back with his paws in the air, completely vulnerable, completely at peace. Cole looked at his own reflection in the dark screen of his phone. He looked tired. He looked scarred. But in the freeze frame of the video, the man laughing at the puppy looked alive. "They think I look happy," Cole whispered to the empty room. It was a terrifying realization. He had spent so long convincing himself that he didn't deserve to be happy, that happiness was a luxury for people who hadn't lost what he'd lost, that seeing it on his own face felt like looking at a stranger. He stood up and walked over to the sleeping dog. Nugget didn't stir. His belly rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Cole knelt down, the floorboards hard against his knees. "You're not just a nuisance, are you?" Cole murmured. He reached out and gently brushed a piece of lint off the puppy's ear. Nugget twitched in his sleep, his back leg kicking as he chased something in a dream. The viral fame was a headache. The exposure was dangerous. But as Cole read through the hundreds of comments from strangers wishing him peace, thanking him for his service, and cheering for the bond between the giant and the runt, he felt the walls of his fortress shifting. They weren't coming down, not yet, but a window had been cut into the stone. "All right," Cole said softly. "You win. You're not going to the shelter." He stood up, feeling lighter than he had in years. He went to the kitchen to pour himself a coffee, his mind already turning over the logistics. He would need dog food, a leash, a bed that wasn't a pile of tactical towels. He would need to figure out how to navigate the world not as a lone operator but as a team. He turned back to look at the dog, a small smile playing on his lips, ready to start the day. But the smile faded instantly. Nugget hadn't moved. That was normal. Puppies slept a lot. But the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest had changed. It was jagged now. Fast. Too fast. Cole frowned, stepping closer. "Nugget." The puppy didn't react. He didn't twitch his ear. He didn't wake up. Cole knelt down, placing a hand on the dog's side. The heat he had felt last night, the comforting furnace-like warmth, was gone, replaced by a terrifying, feverish radiance that burned against Cole's palm. The puppy let out a low, pained whimper in his sleep, and then his small body gave a violent heave. Cole's combat instincts flared, the adrenaline dumping into his system not from a threat, but from a sudden, paralyzing fear. "Nugget!" Cole barked, shaking him gently. The puppy's eyes cracked open, but they weren't the bright amber flames of defiance from the night before. They were glassy, dull, rolling back in his head. Cole scooped the dog up and his heart stopped. Nugget was limp, a dead weight. The viral video didn't matter. The comments didn't matter. The stone wall was gone, and in its place was a man holding the only thing that had made him smile in 3 years, realizing with dawning horror that the silence he had fought so hard to escape was coming back to claim them both. The apartment dissolved. The walls, painted a sterile beige, seemed to melt away, replaced by the blinding white glare of a desert sun. The smell of old coffee and floor wax vanished, overtaken by the copper tang of blood and the suffocating dust of a crumbled compound wall. Cole wasn't kneeling on his hardwood floor anymore. He was kneeling in the sand. And the weight in his arms wasn't a 6-week-old puppy, it was Texas. It was his teammate, his brother, heavy and warm and slipping away faster than Cole could stitch him up. "Stay with me," the voice in Cole's head screamed, a memory playing on a jagged loop. "Don't you fade out on me." In the memory, Tex didn't answer. The light went out of his eyes, leaving Cole holding a body that had become just an object, a vessel emptied of its spark. Cole blinked, a violent, physical spasm that snapped him back to the present. He was in his living room. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked down. Nugget was still limp in his hands. The puppy's head lolled back, his tongue pale, his breathing a shallow, ragged rattle. The paralysis of the flashback tried to claw him back down, the cold, heavy stone of grief that said, "It always ends this way. You touch it, it dies." "No," Cole growled. The sound was guttural, ripping from his throat. He forced the soldier back into the driver's seat. He compartmentalized the panic, shoving the image of Tex into a steel box in his mind and slamming the lid. He assessed the situation. Target, Nugget. Status, critical. Action, medevac. He scanned the floor. Near the overturned trash can from the night's raid, he saw it. A crumpled, torn packaging for a bag of sugar-free gum he'd thrown out 2 days ago. Xylitol. Poison to dogs. "You idiot," Cole whispered, his voice cracking. He didn't grab a coat. He didn't grab his wallet. He grabbed his keys and the dog, sprinting for the door. He took the stairs 4 at a time. The descent was a blur of motion. He burst out into the cool morning air, startling a neighbor walking her poodle. She opened her mouth to speak, but the look on Cole's face, wild, terrified, and dangerous, silenced her instantly. He threw himself into his truck, placing Nugget on the passenger seat, wrapping him in a dirty gym towel he found on the floorboard. "Hang on," Cole commanded, turning the key. "That is a direct order. You do not check out." The truck roared to life. Cole peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching, ignoring the speed limit signs. He drove with the cold, hyper-focused precision of an operator extracting a VIP from a hot zone. Every red light was a calculated risk. Every turn was executed with aggressive efficiency. But inside the cab, the silence was deafening. Nugget wasn't moving. The feisty, screaming, sock-destroying, chaotic force of nature was silent. And that silence was louder than any explosion Cole had ever heard. He fumbled for his phone, hitting the speed dial. "Talk to me," Miller answered on the first ring, his tone shifting instantly from casual to alert when he heard Cole's breathing. "Unit is down," Cole said, his voice tight. "Ingested toxins. En route to the vet on 4th. I don't know what I need." "ETA?" Miller asked sharply. "No jokes. No told you so. Just the mission. 5 minutes out. Drive fast. Don't crash. We're moving." The line went dead. Cole threw the phone onto the dash. He reached over, keeping one hand on the wheel, and placed his palm on Nugget's chest. He needed to feel the beat. It was there, fast, thready, weak. "You stood up to me," Cole shouted over the engine noise, his eyes burning. "You stared down a Navy SEAL and roasted him in front of his squad. You do not get taken out by a pack of gum. You hear me?" Nugget's ear twitched. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Cole swallowed the lump in his throat. "Fight it, damn it." He skidded into the parking lot of the emergency vet clinic, taking up 2 spaces. He was out of the truck before the engine stopped turning over, scooping Nugget up and kicking the clinic door open. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Sir, you can't." He ingested xylitol, Cole barked, marching to the desk. 30 minutes ago. He's crashing. I need a vet now." The command voice was back, but this time it wasn't for intimidation. It was a plea wrapped in steel. The receptionist saw the puppy. She saw the man. She hit a button on her desk. Code blue in the lobby. Double doors swung open. A team of scrubs swarmed him. They took Nugget from his arms. "Wait," Cole said, his hands suddenly empty. "I need to go with him." "You have to stay here, sir," a nurse said firmly, blocking his path. "We've got him. Let us work." The doors swung shut. Cole stood in the middle of the bright, clean lobby, staring at the seam where the doors met. The silence rushed back in. This was the worst part. The waiting. It was the moment the chopper lifted off with the casualty, leaving you on the ground with nothing but the blood on your hands and the echo of the rotors. He backed up until his legs hit a chair and sank into it. He stared at his hands. They were shaking. The stone wall was crumbling, the mortar turning to dust. He put his head in his hands, pressing the heels of his palms into his eyes to stop the burning. He was alone. He had opened the door to his fortress for one night, just a crack, and the universe had punished him for it. It was a reminder. You don't get to keep things. The bell above the clinic door jingled. Cole didn't look up. He couldn't handle pity right now. He couldn't handle civilians telling him it was just a dog. Status report. The voice was familiar. Cole lifted his head. Miller stood there, chest heaving like he'd run the whole way. Behind him were Ramirez and Johnson. They weren't wearing their bar clothes. They were in sweatpants and hoodies, looking disheveled, but their eyes were locked on Cole. "They took him back," Cole rasped. "Poisoning." Miller nodded. He didn't come over and hug him. He didn't offer a platitude. He walked to the chair next to Cole and sat down. Ramirez sat on the other side. Johnson stood guard by the door, arms crossed, staring down anyone who entered. They formed a perimeter. "He's a fighter, LT," Ramirez said quietly. "He's got your stubbornness." "I shouldn't have taken him," Cole whispered. "I wasn't watching him. I fell asleep." "You're human, Cole," Miller said, his voice hard. "Stop trying to court-martial yourself for being human. You gave him a warm bed. You gave him a chance. Now let the docs do their job." Cole looked at his squad. These men had seen him at his best, leading raids with ice in his veins. Now they were seeing him at his absolute worst, broken, terrified, weeping over a stray dog in a veterinary waiting room. And they weren't leaving. "We saw the video comments," Johnson called out from the door. 500,000 people are rooting for that furball. Odds are in his favor. Cole let out a shaky breath. For the first time in 3 years, the burden of survival didn't feel entirely like his own to carry. He wasn't just the stone wall anymore. He was part of a unit again. The minutes dragged into an hour. The clock on the wall ticked loud and rhythmic, mocking them. Every time the double doors opened, Cole flinched, his body coiled to spring. Finally the doors swung wide. A veterinarian in blue scrubs stepped out. She pulled her mask down. Her face was unreadable, her eyes tired. She held a clipboard against her chest. "Mr. Maddox?" she called out. Cole stood up. Miller and Ramirez stood with him, flanking him. "Is he?" Cole couldn't finish the sentence. The vet looked at the 3 large, terrifying men standing in a phalanx, and then her gaze softened on Cole. She took a breath, preparing to deliver the news that would either destroy the man standing before her or give him his life back. "Mr. Maddox," she said softly. "You got here just in time." Cole's knees almost buckled. "So he's okay?" The vet hesitated. "He's stable. But the toxin did a number on his liver. We're not out of the woods yet. The next hour is going to decide everything. I need you to come back and talk to him." "Talk to him?" Cole asked. "He's fighting the sedation," she said with a faint smile. "He's agitated. We can't get his heart rate down. He keeps looking at the door. I think he's waiting for permission to stand down." Cole looked at Miller. Miller nodded. "Go. That's an order." Cole walked toward the double doors, his heart pounding harder than it ever had in combat. He was walking back into the fire, back into the vulnerability he had spent years avoiding. But this time he wasn't afraid of the pain. He was only afraid of the silence. He pushed through the doors, stepping into the hum of machines and the smell of antiseptic, unaware that the hardest battle of his life wasn't over, it was just entering the final phase. And the outcome hung on a single, fragile heartbeat. The sound of the heart monitor was a rhythmic, high-pitched chirp that cut through the sterile air of the recovery room. To Cole it sounded dangerously like a countdown. Nugget lay inside a stainless steel kennel, and 4-line taped to his shaved front leg, his small chest rising and falling in jagged, uneven spasms. The veterinarian hadn't been lying. The puppy was fighting the sedation. His eyes were squeezed shut, his paws twitching as if he were trying to run, trying to patrol, trying to find the source of the heat that had vanished. Cole stepped up to the bars. He looked huge in the small room, a bull in a china shop, but his movements were terrified and gentle. "Hey," Cole whispered, his voice catching in a way that would have mortified him yesterday. Nugget's ears swiveled. He let out a low, distressed whine, thrashing his head against the towel. The heart monitor sped up. Beep, 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 beep. "He's panicking," the vet murmured from the doorway. "He doesn't know where he is." Cole gripped the metal bars of the cage. He knew that panic. He knew the feeling of waking up in the dark, not knowing if you were in a hospital or a hole in the ground. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He needed to be the anchor. "Nugget," Cole said, dropping his voice into that deep, vibrating register, the command voice. But this time he stripped away the intimidation. He stripped away the anger. He filled it with the absolute, unshakable certainty of a leader promising safety. "Stand down, soldier." The effect was instantaneous. The puppy froze. His amber eyes cracked open, glassy and drugged, and rolled clumsily until they found Cole's face. He blinked once, twice. He saw the stone wall standing guard. He saw the perimeter was secure. Nugget let out a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to deflate his entire body. He licked his dry nose, rested his chin on his paws, and finally stopped fighting. The monitor slowed. Beep, beep, beep. "Mission accomplished," Cole whispered, reaching through the bars to rest his hand on the puppy's flank. "Rest now. I've got the watch." For the next 2 days, Cole Maddox did not leave the veterinary clinic. He slept in the uncomfortable plastic chair in the lobby. He drank terrible coffee brought to him by Miller and Ramirez, who took shifts sitting with him. He was a fixture, a silent sentinel guarding the door to the recovery ward. When the vet finally gave the all-clear, telling Cole that the liver values had stabilized and the recruit was ready for discharge, Cole didn't smile. He just nodded, the relief hitting him so hard his knees felt weak. He walked out of that clinic carrying Nugget not like a dog, but like a piece of unexploded ordnance that was also made of precious crystal. The recovery was slow, but the bond was instantaneous and absolute. There was no more talk of shelters. There was no more talk of temporary extraction. Cole bought a dog bed, which Nugget ignored, high-end kibble, which Nugget devoured, and a tactical vest with a handle on the back, which made Nugget look like the world's toughest teddy bear. 3 weeks later, the heavy steel door of the LZ creaked open on a Friday night. The bar was packed. The jukebox was blaring classic rock, and the air was thick with smoke and laughter. But as the draft hit the room, heads turned instinctively toward the entrance, expecting another veteran to shuffle in out of the cold. What they got was a procession. First came Cole Maddox. He wasn't hunching his shoulders to block out the world anymore. He stood tall, his jacket unzipped, his face relaxed in a way that made him look 10 years younger. And trotting at his heel, tethered by a heavy-duty tactical leash, was Nugget. The puppy had filled out. His coat was glossy and clean, the mange and dirt of the alley a distant memory. He wore a black harness with a custom Velcro patch on the side that read, "Morale Officer. Attention on deck." Miller shouted from the bar, raising a glass. The room erupted. It wasn't the polite applause of strangers. It was the roaring welcome of a family. Nugget didn't cower. He didn't hide behind Cole's legs. He soaked it up. He trotted into the room with his head held high, his tail wagging a mile a minute, greeting every soldier like a visiting dignitary. He accepted head scratches from Johnson. He sniffed Ramirez's boots to check for contraband beef jerky. Cole unclipped the leash and walked to his corner booth, the same booth where the standoff had happened. But he didn't sit alone. "Hey, Cole," the bartender called out, sliding a pitcher of beer onto the table. She looked down at the dog, who had immediately hopped onto the bench seat next to Cole. "Does the officer want a bowl of water?" "Ice water," Cole corrected, grinning. "He has standards." Nugget barked, a sharp, sassy yap of agreement. The squad crowded into the booth, squeezing in around Cole. 4 years, there had been an invisible barrier around this table, a perimeter of grief that no one dared to cross. Now Nugget was physically climbing over people to lick faces, dismantling the barrier one wag at a time. "So," Miller said, clinking his glass against Cole's, "is he fully operational?" "He's cleared for duty," Cole said, resting his hand on the dog's head. Nugget leaned into the touch, closing his eyes. "You look different, LT," Ramirez noted, tearing a coaster into pieces to entertain the dog. "You look present." Cole looked around the table. He looked at the faces of the men he had served with, men he had kept at arm's length because he was afraid that loving them meant losing them. He looked at the scars they all carried, visible and invisible. Then he looked down at Nugget. The puppy was chewing on the corner of the table again, completely ignoring the rules of engagement Cole had tried to teach him. Cole realized then that the silence hadn't protected him. It had just been a slow way of dying. It took a chaotic, loud-mouthed, disobedient creature to show him that life wasn't about surviving the quiet. It was about making enough noise to chase the ghosts away. "He roasts you every morning, doesn't he?" Johnson asked, laughing as Nugget let out a dramatic yawn that sounded like a squeaky door hinge. "Every single morning," Cole admitted, a genuine laugh bubbling up from his chest, a sound that was deep and rich and free. "I give him an order, and he gives me a lecture." "He saved you, man," Miller said softly, the jokes falling away for a second. Cole stopped laughing. He looked at the dog, who was now busy trying to catch a fly, completely unaware of the gravity of the conversation. "Yeah," Cole whispered, the truth of it settling in his bones like iron. "He did." Nugget paused mid-snap. He looked up at Cole, amber eyes bright and knowing. He didn't bark. He didn't mimic a command. He just pressed his head against Cole's chest, right over his heart, and held it there. The stone wall was gone. In its place was a man, a dog, and a future that was loud, messy, and absolutely worth living. And as the laughter of the squad rose up around them, filling the lodge with warmth, Cole Maddox finally ordered another round, realizing that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't looking for the exit. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. But the story of Nugget and the stone wall is just beginning. If you thought a puppy roasting a Navy SEAL was funny, wait until you see what happens when Cole tries to introduce Nugget to the concept of dating. Rumor has it that Nugget has very strong opinions about who is allowed to date his dad, and he has a vocal way of making his objections known. Does Nugget become the ultimate wingman, or the world's worst third wheel? And what happens when viral fame brings a Hollywood producer knocking on Cole's door wanting to put Nugget in a movie? Cole spent 3 years sitting in the dark, convinced no one cared. If you leave this video without subscribing, you're walking out that door just like everyone else did before Nugget showed up. Don't let the silence win. Hit like to show Cole he's not alone anymore and comment, "Welcome home" below. Or, just keep scrolling and let the stone wall go back up.